All right. Good try. Go ahead and put the phone in there, please. Excuse me. Excuse me. Excuse me. Go ahead and put your phone in the container, please. Thank you. Okay, I want to, before we get into the lesson, and after we get done with the brief talk, I'm going to want you to rearrange yourself. We don't have very many students here today, probably because we're right before a holiday weekend. Several of them decided to take a little early holiday. Can't say I blame them, but at any rate, I'm going to have you guys gather up because it is a group project today that we're doing. I'm going to have you guys working as a group. Fairly simple project. I think you guys will enjoy it. So yeah, I think you'll enjoy it, but I do want you to make sure that you're in groups of at least 2, preferably groups of 3 to 4 each. We only have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Yeah, only 11 here today. Another quick reminder, I do like to let everybody know that we are videoing this particular class. It's something that's done as part of my teacher training. My instructor looks at it and gives me some feedback on my instruction. So if you have any objection, you don't want to be on the camera, just make sure you're sitting on that side of the room, and then you won't be on the camera. Okay, on the board today, quote, darkness cannot drive out darkness, only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate, only love can do that. Anybody know who said that? Leonardo DiCaprio. No, it wasn't Leonardo DiCaprio. Anybody know who is famous for that? Little hint, he also made a very famous speech that started with, I have a dream. There we go, Martin Luther King Jr. Okay, so why would I be talking about Martin Luther King Jr. today? Okay, yep. Monday is his birthday, right? Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday. Now, I would normally talk about him on his birthday, but if I came here to talk about him on his birthday, nobody would be here to hear me. So that's why I'm talking about him today. I've always kind of struggled with where to put this in a world history class, because I mean it's fairly easy to figure out in an American history class. I mean, hopefully we all know a little bit about Dr. King, right? I mean, he's impacted all of our lives. All of our lives have benefited because of Dr. King and because of the work that he did in social justice. But so the question for me is, okay, where does that fit into world history? I don't usually touch as much on American subjects because you guys already had American history in 9th grade, right? Everybody or most of you took American history. But some things are a big enough deal that even though you covered it, it's worth covering again, and we really should talk about regularly, at least every year. And in my opinion, Dr. King is one of those people that we should be talking about every year. Aybody agree with me? Hands up, you agree with me? Okay, good. The rest of you, I have an assignment. No, I'm just kidding. At any rate, we've been talking about, well, rather than me tell you, who remembers what we have been talking about? What period of history have we been studying?
Renaissance.
The Renaissance, okay. And what other things were going on at the same time as the Renaissance? The Renaissance referred to a lot of the big sweeping cultural changes that took place, specifically talking about what was going on religiously in Europe. What do we call that period of time or that movement? We talked about it on Monday and Tuesday. Tuesday for you guys. Okay, Diana. Who was the German monk who opposed some of the common teachings of the Catholic Church? Okay, how about you, Jose Faria? He was, well, yeah, Germans can be monks, so monks can be of any nationality. Okay, there's a church that actually a fairly common church that's named after this guy. He was the one that, remember, he challenged the Catholic teaching. We watched a couple videos about this, about purgatory and some of their fundraising practices. I'll give you a little hint. We're talking about Martin Luther King Jr., who was named after this guy. I heard somebody say it. Who was it? Martin Luther. Yes, Martin Luther. Okay, and actually it wasn't Martin Luther King Jr. who was named after, it was Martin Luther King Sr., because Martin Luther King Jr. was named after Martin Luther King Sr., right, okay. But at any rate, he was named after this guy. He was a major figure in the Protestant Reformation, which brought about tremendous change in Europe. Anybody remember what was one of the disagreements as the Protestant Reformation started between the Protestants and the Catholics? You guys are quiet today. This class is usually pretty responsive. Because nobody's here? Oh, okay, that could be. So Yasmin, what was one thing that Martin Luther objected to? Okay, that's Martin Luther King. We're talking about Martin Luther. He objected to the idea that you could buy salvation. That's exactly right. And that really was his biggest argument, was salvation is by faith through grace, or by grace through faith, rather. And he objected to the idea that you could get salvation, or that you could buy salvation for your loved ones with money. Now, what were some of the reasons that he might have objected to that? Okay. You're close. You're kind of on the right track.
People with like a bunch of sins could just buy their way.
Yeah, he objected to that. He objected to the idea that, in his argument, you're close, because one of the other disagreements that he had with the Catholic Church was the idea that you could be forgiven of your sins based on how good you are. Okay, he said that forgiveness or salvation was only by grace and only through faith. In other words, it's totally God's forgiveness for us. And I'm not trying to get too deep into the theology of it here, because this isn't a religion class, it's a history class. But that was his objection, the idea that, people just are going to buy their way into heaven. He had a problem with that. Announcements, guys.
Excuse interruption, staff and students. Stepperson Sanchez, report to the main office immediately. Stepperson Sanchez, report to the main office immediately.
That sounds serious, but it's not us, so it's all right. Keep moving. Okay, who remembers what the Counter-Reformation was? It was a movement. Now, the Reformation was a movement that split off from the Catholic Church. So then what do you think the Counter-Reformation was? It was a movement by whom? By what group? By the Catholics, okay? And what were they trying to do in the Counter-Reformation? They were trying to counter the Reformation. That was a big part of it. But you'll remember, in the Counter-Reformation, they were also recognizing some of the concerns that the Reformation had. I didn't get into this too much Monday or Tuesday, but there's an interesting individual named Johann Tetzel, who his behavior was a lot of what sparked the Reformation. He was going around areas of Germany, and he had like a chest, a casket. And he even had a little rhyme that he had. When he would tell people he'd tell them their loved ones who had died were in the flames of purgatory and they were being tortured. And he would say, when your money in the casket clings, the souls of your loved ones from purgatory springs. And it rhymes better in German than it does in English. But Luther had a problem with that. He had a problem with the idea that you could just buy your way into heaven. Part of his problem had to do with social justice. Somebody mentioned Martin Luther King Jr., that his work had to do with social justice. Well, we don't always think of, Martin Luther in terms of social justice, but one of his objections to the idea that you could buy your way into heaven by donating money was he didn't think it was fundamentally fair that a wealthy person could get their loved ones out of purgatory, but somebody who was poor, it might take like 6 months of their wages to pay the same price. And yet, his concern was that people were being taken advantage of. Because think about it, if you had a loved one who was in prison, and worse, they were in prison and they were being tortured, being tortured daily. How many of you, if you had somebody like that, if it was your brother, well, maybe not your brother or sister, I don't know about you, I'd probably leave my brother there. But I know it was weak, but you can give me a little courtesy laugh, right? No, not even that? Okay. It must be the day before the weekend, it must be Friday. Okay, but, so anyway, if you had a loved one in that kind of a situation, how many of you would give whatever you had to get them out? If you had to work harder, work overtime, work extra hours, work extra shifts, I mean, how many of you would give up your money to do that? And now think about it, if that prison is eternal, and it involves like fire and real torture and stuff, most of us would do whatever it takes. And he was concerned that they were playing on the ignorance of people to take advantage of them and take money that they didn't have to give. And so it became, in some ways, a justice issue, that peasants were being taken advantage of. Now, Martin Luther's track record isn't perfect on social justice, because when the peasants rose up, we also learned about this. What did he do? He didn't allow it. He actually wrote a tract against the peasants, and against them. He had a problem with them upsetting the social norms, as far as, you had the kings and you had the nobles and the different layers of society within the world at that time. That he was not always on the side of the poor, but he also did not want to see the poor taken advantage of. So, like most people in history, he's kind of a mixed bag, right? Okay, the videos that we looked at, and we got this information about the Protestant Reformation, about Luther, are still available in Google Classroom from Monday, well, rather Tuesday, was when this class had them, on Tuesday. There's also a video that I want us to watch together. This one is about Martin Luther King Jr. Now, initially for this assignment, and you'll see this in the assignment, initially what I had planned was to do a video, and with kind of the issues we've been having with the phones, I can't have us use the phones for a video, unfortunately. But what I'm going to have us do is to write a script. Now, initially I had planned for you to choose, and I had several choices, and you can still do this, but I think there's one choice probably most of you will pick, or I'm kind of hoping, kind of leaning toward. But it has to deal with the conflict between the different groups of people. Different groups, like during the Reformation, during the Scientific Revolution. The example that I put in there for an assignment has to do with, and you can read it, so you can see what I'm looking for in putting a script together. And you guys have done these sorts of things before, you know kind of the idea. But I put that in there as a sample, and that one involves Galileo and the Pope discussing whether the Earth or the Sun is at the center of the universe. If you were here Wednesday, you will remember that we watched a video about the scientific revolution and how a lot of that had to do with our understanding of the solar system, and how scientists were coming up with new discoveries, and the church was not always real fast to be excited about those things. Since then, the church has, by and large, come to agree that yes, the sun is the center of the solar system, but at that time, it created conflict. And so, what you're going to do is you're going to make sure that both sides are represented in the script. You're going to write in as if there was a moderator and two historical figures disagreeing about any one of the issues that we learned about Monday or Tuesday. Could be whether the sun is the center of the solar system, could be whether salvation is by grace, or whether you can buy your way into heaven with indulgences. It could be any of the many issues. It could be, you remember we talked about how the Protestant Reformation fragmented in Lutherans and Calvinists and different groups. It could be between the leaders of those, or, and here's the one that I would most recommend. This is a group project. You need to have at least 3 in your group to do this. I want you to write the script today, and then on probably Wednesday we'll look at acting them out. Those who are brave enough to get up in front of the class and act them out, I will give you extra credit for that. I'm not going to require it like I did with the videos on the phones, because I know some people are a little more squeamish about that than others, and that's okay. But at least make sure that we have the script ready. The script should be long enough that it would take 3 to 5 minutes to read and to go through it if you're doing it live or if you were doing it on a video. The example that I have in there is, I think that ended up being about 6 minutes when I read it. So look at that and think just a little bit shorter than that one. Okay, at any rate, the one that I would recommend that we do, we're going to watch a video about Martin Luther, and I added this today. The other classes, the odd block classes did not get this one as an option. But I want you to imagine that Martin Luther King was able to travel through time, and that he was able to meet with Martin Luther, after whom, again, he was named. What would they talk about? What things would they agree on? What things would they disagree on? Who knows what Martin Luther King Jr., what was his job? I mean, obviously he was in the civil rights movement, but what did he do? What did he do as a job? He was a pastor. Yes, do we know what kind of church he was a pastor of? What's that? It was a Christian church, but again, with Christians, Catholics are Christians and Protestants are Christians. So was Martin Luther King Jr. Catholic, or was he Protestant? No, he wasn't Catholic. He was Baptist, actually. The Baptist is, we're not going to get too deep into all the different kinds. Excuse me, class. But Baptist is one of the many, many different types of Protestant churches. Have a good weekend. So, now, Baptists aren't Lutheran per se, and I don't want to necessarily get too much into the differences, the religious differences between, say, Baptists and Lutherans. But just know that they are both Protestant. And so what I want you to do, after we watch this video, you're going to get in groups. You're going to assign one person to look up information about Martin Luther. One person to look up information about Dr. King. And then you're going to compare.
Excuse the interruption, staff. Please do your 8-hour attendance if you have not done so at this time. Once again, we need all staff to complete your 8-hour attendance at this time. Thank you.
Well, hey, I already did mine, so we're good to go. All right, at any rate, and if you do choose one of the other groups of people, the same things apply, but just instead of Dr. King and Martin Luther, you would be assigning one person each to research those people, and then you're going to come together as a group and you're going to put together a script. The script should include a moderator. Who knows what a moderator is? Like a what? Kind of like a middleman, kind of like the host, right? Kind of like the host. And so they're going to be the ones that ask the questions. Okay, and again, there's an example in there that you'll be able to see what it ought to look like. There's an example in Google Classroom and you can see that. Okay, so before I get too much further into it, I do want to watch your video because I want to make sure I get to that, if nothing else. If we don't get completely done with these scripts today, I will make additional time on Wednesday to do them when we have, yes, Wednesday, Tuesday, Wednesday, whichever day. They changed next week's schedule up a little bit because of Martin Luther King Day. Is it, okay, Tuesday that we're together in this class? In any case, I will make about 20-25 more minutes available if we need time to do that. But I want to make sure that we watch this, and in the script, I want you to, if you do Martin Luther and Martin Luther King Jr., that's not so much a debate as it would be a discussion. Still, you would want somebody to play the part of the moderator, and still they would be asking questions where do they find places of agreement. Obviously, they were both Protestant ministers, but where do they find disagreement? Where do they look at things differently? You can find that information. You're going to simply look up, use Google, look up information about Dr. King, look up information about Martin Luther. Remember to be looking for whether a source is credible. Use the CRAP test like we've been using all year long, okay, to look at whether a source is credible. And also you're going to want to make sure you list on, at the bottom what you know what your sources are. I'm not going to be real fussy with the format of this, but just write down what the name of the article, who the author was, just the very basics of the information, so that I can see where you got it from. But you're going to be, the script should show that you have an understanding of where the two men might have been different and where they might have been similar, where they might have had some similar worldviews. We're going to go ahead and watch this now, because like I said, I do want to make sure we get to this. Martin Luther King Jr. is just one of those people that world history, American history, whatever kind of history, we should be talking about him on Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and since this is as close as we can get this one, we're going to do it. Would you guys like the lights down when we watch this? You want to go ahead and, if you could do that, you don't want to do that? Okay, well, I can come over and do that, that's fine.
Hi, I'm
Is that
Glenn
loud
Smith,
enough?
and this is Crash Course Black American History.
You
Perhaps
guys, thank you.
the most notable figure of the modern civil rights movement is Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. King has become a symbol of peace, courage, sacrifice, and impeccable leadership. But it's important to remember that he didn't do this alone. Together with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Dr. King played a pivotal role in changing the tide of civil rights legislation in the United States from 1956 to 1960. Another important thing is that we're often taught about Dr. King in a two-dimensional sort of way that often flattens and oversimplifies or just ignores the totality of his political beliefs. But we're not going to do that today. So let's start the show. Martin Luther King Jr. was born in 1929 in Atlanta, Georgia. At just 15 years old, King was admitted into Morehouse College, which is an HBCU in Atlanta. There,
Who knows
he
what
pledged Alpha
HBCU
Phi Alpha
means?
Fraternity Incorporated, the oldest black fraternity in the United States, and one that I joined when I was in college too. At Morehouse, he studied law and medicine. At first, he had no intention of following in the footsteps of his father, who was a minister. That is, until he met Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays. Mays was then the president of Morehouse College, and he was also a minister. He'd established a reputation of advocating for racial equality, and his work had an enormous influence on the young Martin. So after graduating from Morehouse, King received a Bachelor's of Divinity in Theology from Crozer Theological Seminary in Upland, Pennsylvania, and then a PhD in Systematic Theology from Boston University in 1955. While in Boston, he met the woman who would become his wife, Miss Coretta Scott, and they married and soon settled down in Montgomery, Alabama, where King began as pastor at Dexter Avenue Baptist Church. Not even a year into settling into their new home, the city began to bubble with tension because of the monumental Brown v. Board decision that declared key tenets of Plessy v. Ferguson unconstitutional. The desegregation of schools sparked unrest among Black citizens in Montgomery who wanted to see Jim Crow segregation undone in all areas of life. And this is how Martin met Rosa Parks. The Black citizens of Montgomery had long awaited an opportunity to launch an attack on the horrid abuse that took place within the segregationist system of public transportation. The 1955 arrest of Rosa Parks was the last straw. While community members and leaders were ready to take action, they sought out a leader who had an impeccable reputation. And as someone new in town, King also had the benefit of having a clean slate to work with. So Dr. King got his first taste of leadership when he was asked to head the Montgomery Improvement Association and lead the Montgomery bus boycott. Soon after the successful boycott, King was invited to Atlanta, Georgia, to create an effort similar to the Montgomery bus boycott that could be executed across the South. Over January 10th and 11th of 1957, 60 Black ministers and civil rights leaders convened in Atlanta at the renowned Ebenezer Baptist Church to replicate the successful Montgomery strategy. This group would soon become known as the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC. As an organization inextricably linked to the Black church, it is no surprise that the SCLC regarded churches as pivotal organizing bases for civil rights activism. The ministers of the SCLC soon chose Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. to be their first president, and in its later years, the SCLC would address other pressing issues like war and poverty. Reverend Ralph Abernathy Sr. co-founded the SCLC and served as the organization's treasurer. Another individual key to the success of Dr. King was Bayard Rustin. While he did not hold a specific leadership position, he served as King's advisor and right-hand man since the Montgomery bus boycott. During the Montgomery demonstrations, Rustin helped King develop the movement's nonviolent rhetoric that became the foundation of the SCLC's work. From the beginning, the SCLC identified nonviolence as their cornerstone strategy. They also soon decided to make the SCLC movement open to all individuals, regardless of race, religion, or background. King and the SCLC grew determined to bring national attention to the plight of Black Americans in Birmingham, a city that was regarded as one of the most segregated places in all of the United States. The objective of this campaign was to end discriminatory practices in hiring, desegregate stores, and accelerate the desegregation of school. And in a direct violation of a ruling against protests, King held a Good Friday demonstration on April 12, 1963. That day, he and 50 others were arrested. And later, a friend smuggled a copy of the local newspaper to Dr. King while he was in his cell. He opened the paper to find that 8 white clergymen had published an essay that criticized the march that he had led and other similar demonstrations against racial inequality. In the piece, entitled "A Call for Unity," the clergymen urged Black locals to refrain from letting outsiders sway them toward unwise and untimely behaviors that might incite violence, and told them to stick to petitioning the local courts for their rights. Deeply frustrated by what he had just read, King, in that moment, began to write a response, doing so in the margins of the very newspaper he had read the column. And King didn't hold back, and this document became one of the most central documents of the entire civil rights movement. In his letter from a Birmingham jail, King rejected the idea that what was happening in Birmingham wasn't his business. Quote, "I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly." He pushed back against the idea that if Black people were just patient, equality would soon come. Quote, We know through painful experience that freedom is never voluntarily given by the oppressor. It must be demanded by the oppressed. For years now, I've heard the word wait. It rings in the ear of every Negro with piercing familiarity. This wait is almost always meant never. And then he made his famous assertion that the white moderate was an immense danger to the success of the civil rights movement. Quote, I must confess that over the past few years, I've been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's greatest stumbling block in his drive toward freedom is not the white citizens counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate, who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I cannot agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically believes he can set the timetable for another man's freedom. When he was finished, he had written nearly 7,000 words, and with the help of his attorney, those words were smuggled out of the jail and printed in newspapers and magazines across the country. King's letter did not just speak directly to the clergyman, it was also an appeal to America's soul. The SCLC was not the only organization working toward the desegregation of public services in search of racial equality. So too was the more radical Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, also known as SNCC. These two organizations were largely working toward a similar set of goals, but often had different ideas of how to get there. You see, the SCLC strictly applied the model of propping up one charismatic central leader. And in this case, it was Dr. King. SNCC, on the other hand, emphasized group-centered leadership. But despite their differences in approach, there were also times when the two organizations worked together, like the 1963 March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom and the 1965 March on Selma. The combined efforts of SNCC, the SCLC, Black and white citizens, and ministers from across the country proved successful, finally applying enough pressure to get Lyndon B. Johnson to sign the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. In late 1967, the SCLC opened a new chapter with its Poor People's Campaign. It was launched to close the wealth gap between whites and blacks and to combat the growing and racialized threat of poverty in the United States. As Dr. King put it, what good is having the right to sit at a lunch counter if you can't afford to buy a hamburger? Just as King was pivoting SCLC work toward economic justice, he was assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee on April 4th, 1960. Unfortunately, the Poor People's Campaign collapsed in his absence. After King's death, the SCLC remained active in aiding black voter registration and supporting protests across the South. But the late 1960s met the growth of a more militant sect of protesters, leaders, and intellectuals. The burgeoning Black Power movement was taking root, and people were becoming disillusioned with the idea of nonviolent, peaceful protest. Speaking of nonviolence, there is another important point to make here. Sometimes people can turn Dr. King into a sort of caricature of himself that strips him of any political complexity that was actually central to who he was. People love to cite his line, I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And in doing so, they basically turn him into a single line in the I Have a Dream speech and make him out to be some sort of nonviolent kumbaya teddy bear. And while it is true that Dr. King was deeply committed to nonviolence, a deeper analysis of his work, writing, and speeches reveal that King's political views were often more radical and more expansive than they have often been made out to be. For example, King advocated for a guaranteed universal basic income and guaranteed employment for anyone willing to work. One of his basic principles was that no one should be forced to live in poverty, while others live in luxury. Additionally, he spoke out against the war in Vietnam and American imperialism more broadly. In a 1967 speech, he called the United States government, quote, the greatest purveyor of violence in the world. And while King seems to be widely loved and respected today, it wasn't always that way. In 1966, just 2 years before he was killed, according to Gallup polls, 2/3 of Americans didn't approve of him or his work. All of this is a reminder that advocating for social change, pushing against the status quo, and fighting against those in positions of power doesn't mean you'll be popular when you're doing it. In fact, you might be vilified, just like King was. But attempting to build a better society has never been about being popular or well-liked. It's about trying to build the sort of world that we all deserve to live in, even if it means you won't get to see that world yourself. And King, more than anyone, he knew this. He famously said in the last speech he ever delivered, on the day before he was assassinated, quote, "I've been to the mountaintop. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we, as a people, will get to the promised land." Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time. Crash Course is made with the help of all these nice people, and our animation team is Starcraft. Crash Course is made possible by all of our viewers and supporters. Thanks to them.
Okay, so what stood out to you in the video about Dr. King? Said something. Okay. Imani, what stood out to you in the video? Okay, he was a pastor, he was willing to fight for others. Okay. Okay. Adrian, what stood out to you? Nothing? Okay, we'll think about it. We'll come back to you. Jose Lopez. He's not even here. It must be getting close to the weekend. All right, Diana, what stood out to you? Okay. Okay. How was his message received? Was everybody enthusiastic about it? No? Were some people enthusiastic about it? I mean, yeah, it kind of depends on what side you're on. What did he do when people suggested to him that he shouldn't spread his message the way that he was? People were telling him, hey, I agree with what you're trying to do, but this isn't the way to do it. I wouldn't say he quite ignored them. Yeah, yeah. He kept on doing what he was doing, and I know what you mean by he ignored him. He kept on keeping on. But what did he do in the newspaper when there was an article that was suggesting that he shouldn't go about holding demonstrations and things like that? He wrote back. Okay, now how did he spread his message? Obviously, that's one way he wrote. How else did he spread his message? Speeches, somebody said? Yeah. Okay. What landed him in jail in the first place? What was he leading that... Marches, demonstrations, right. Okay, so as we're doing the assignment here, as we're doing the group assignment, these are different things that maybe you could look at for similarities or differences between how Martin Luther King Jr. brought about change and how Martin Luther brought about change. Did they use some of the same methods? Did they use different methods? Think about that. If you need to, you can refer back to the video on Martin Luther. Again, that's posted on in the assignments on Monday and Tuesday. There's a link there if you need to look back at that. Or, of course, you can Google information about both of them. There's all kinds of information. But at this time, I want you to get into groups of at least 3. Everybody should be with a group of at least 3. Necesitamos, trabajamos juntos en grupos de 3 o más. 3 o más. Nobody should be sitting by themselves, so 1, 2, 3. I can either make you guys a group of 3, or if you guys wanna, we can make 2 bigger groups if you want to. More hands make lighter work, right? So if you have more people working on it together, and you can look at the videos, you can look back at this one. This one's also linked in today's assignments if you need to look at it again. Another great way to get information would be to simply Google quotes, Martin Luther quotes and Martin Luther King Jr. quotes. See if you can find some similarities in what they had to say, see if you can find some differences. Okay? And again, I found with the other 2 classes that have done this, that they needed a little extra time. So if we don't get quite to a finished product on this today, that's okay. We will get back into groups and we will finish it on Tuesday. Okay? So can I get you guys to get into groups, please, with some of your peers? Or I can assign them. You 3 working as a group? Okay. You 3 are working as a group? Okay. So I need you 3 to either work as a group together or to get with one of these 2 groups. You guys will both take more members, right? Their group's okay with that? Can I get you to work with these guys? Puedes trabajar con ellos? Por favor. Well, come and try your best. You can either work with the young ladies or you can work with these guys. If I was you, I'd have probably picked the young ladies, but that's up to you. Do your best. I know it's Friday, I know we've got a holiday weekend ahead, and I know we're all a little bit tired, but let's push through. We've only got, how long? Maybe, I don't have the watch on, and our clock has quit working, so I don't know how long we have left, but it's not too much longer. Normally I would check my phone, but my phone is being used to record, so. 1:28, so we got 45 minutes left to go. Yes, you can. See you guys in a few minutes. Other questions on what we're doing? Do you guys understand what we're doing? The instructions are in Google Classroom. In case there are any questions, and I'm certainly happy to answer any questions that you have. What we should be looking at as we look at these 2 men, Martin Luther King and Martin Luther, is what were the long-term impacts of their lives and of the changes that they helped bring about. What were the long-term impacts? Thank you. It's kind of important to work this part of the participation part of the training. I promise I don't have cooties. Well, I don't know, a couple of them. Real one. Real one. I have confidence in you. We're all tired. We could be tired of it. You're probably better if you're in a group in that way. You're talking. Well, okay, usually that's true, but occasionally in social studies, we have to be social. So, come be sociable, come be part of the group, and come help out. Yeah. You guys will work with him, right? Thank you. Work with him. Thank you. You can understand. Now, usually when I tell you guys don't talk, everybody wants to talk, so. Of course, my roommate Parker's didn't come today. So most of you guys are not my super talkative students, but at any rate, you can talk. I want you to talk, I want you to work together. You guys understand what we're doing, right? Are you guys gonna do Martin Luther King or different? Those two. I was hoping most groups would pick. Are you guys doing Martin Luther King and Martin Luther, or are you doing a different? Okay. Probably we want to have that decided here within the next couple minutes, because we only have about 40 minutes to make tracks of it. Then like I said, I'll just finish. You want people to see that? I don't know who Martin Luther King is. That's true too. That's true. And you always do. Your groups always do really good work. I mean, I really liked the group you were in when we did the Renaissance dancing. I thought you guys did fantastic. Thank you. Something that you guys might consider between the two is what were some similarities in the methods they used to get their message out. What things did they do similarly to one another, or differently, or I should say, and differently, because there were both similarities and differences.
Good afternoon, staff and students.
This announcements,
Please
guys?
prepare for afternoon announcements. I need the following students to report to the main office. Angie Gutierrez, Amar Leva, Resendez, Edwin Lopez, Murillo, Jada Bell Smith, Chase Nevels, Adrian Torres Alvarado, Melanie Zamora Abarca. Please report to the main office. Students, all after-school activities have been canceled, including our basketball game, due to expected inclement weather. Please be safe going home. Please be diligent about bundling up. The temperature is going to drop over the weekend. And we want everyone to be safe and be ready to return on Tuesday. Teachers, we will have an emergency staff meeting at 2:17 in the Little Theater. This meeting will last 8 to 10 minutes. Please join me and Dr. Leverett in the Media Center at 2:17. Media Center. I believe all our buses are arriving on time and as scheduled. Therefore, that concludes our Friday afternoon announcements. Please be safe going home.
Right here, Lily.
We'll see everyone on Tuesday.
Okay, got that? It's gonna be cold, make sure you bundle up. I don't know what you guys, but I wanna talk to the manager or whoever scheduled this snowstorm. Because for them to give it to us on the weekend when we're gonna be off anyway, I mean, you'd think they could've planned it for this morning, we could've had a 4-day weekend instead of 3, right? Yes, go ahead. Go ahead and use it right by there and then put it back in. I don't imagine that announcement changes anything for you guys, but if it does and you need to arrange a ride or something, if you need to use your phone real quickly, just use it by where it is and then leave it there so that we're not breaking any rules there, but, I understand that might have changed the situation for you and we can to make a small exception there.